wide on the cottonwoods at sundown. A dust trail rises behind a single wagon on a 5-mile road in southern Missouri. The driver does not slow. He throws her bag into the dirt and rolls on. Closer. A woman in a gray dress, 24 years old, stands alone where the wagon left her. $20 sewn into her hem. A Bible against her ribs. A silver magnolia pinned in her hair. A woman on the boardwalk spits in the dust. Lord help that poor widower's children. Wide again miles south. A second dust trail. 4 riders. A silver watch chain catches the late sun. Closer. Polished black boots come down off a saddle. A hand brushes the chain flat against a vest. Pull back to the porch of an Ashford ranch. A father has not slept in 11 months. A child has not spoken in 11 months. A lilac is blooming out of season. The riders come on. The woman keeps walking. The summer of 1918 sat heavy on the porch boards at Willow Creek, Missouri. The lilac in the side yard was blooming out of season again. Pale purple clusters drooping in the August heat. The way they had done a handful of times in the 40 years since a 4-year-old girl had pushed it into the ground with her bare hands. Caleb Ashford, 48 years old, sat in the rocking chair his father had carved before he was born and held a Western Union telegram between his thumb and forefinger. He had read it 3 times. He did not need to read it again. His son Garrett, named for the grandfather Caleb had loved more than any other man on earth, had died in the Argonne forest on the 17th of July. The telegram said, "Killed in action." It did not say how. Caleb did not need to know how. He had been to Cuba in '98 with Roosevelt, and he knew the only honest thing the Army ever wrote on those papers was the date. In the kitchen behind him, through the open window, he could hear the soft click of knitting needles. His mother, 64 years old, sat by the stove in the chair she had occupied for 40 years, and she was knitting socks for the boy whose telegram lay folded in her son's vest pocket. She did not know yet. Caleb had been waiting for the sun to lower. He could not say the words while the kitchen was still full of light. At his feet sat his sister's boy, Tobias Whitlock. 10 years old, hair the color of dry hay knees, scabbed from a fall off the milking stool a week ago. He was watching the lilac the way a boy watches something he has been told is unusual, but cannot yet understand. "Uncle Caleb," he said. "Yes, son. Mama says when you're sad you have to tell somebody. She says it's a rule." Caleb did not answer for a long moment. The lilac swayed once, though there was no wind. "Mama is a wise woman, so tell me something. What would you like to hear?" Tobias turned and looked up at him. The picture on the mantel, the lady in the gray dress standing by a great-granddad, the one with the brooch in her hair shaped like a magnolia. Who is she? Caleb pressed his palm flat against the front of his vest, against the folded telegram inside. He kept it there a moment. Then he reached into his trouser pocket and took out a small folding knife. Bone handle. The brass on the bolster was worn smooth from 3 generations of thumbs. He laid the knife across his open palm. and looked at it the way a man looks at a thing he has not been able to put down all morning. That Tobias is your grandmother Clara. She came up that road there the summer I was 8 years old. In the wagon. They threw her off the wagon in the dirt of Willow Creek with $20 sewn into the hem of her dress and a Bible that was all she had in the whole world. The town watched her step down. A woman on the boardwalk spit in the dust and said, "Lord help that poor widower's children." That was the welcome she got. That was the very first word spoken to her in this place. The boy's eyes had gone wide. Who was the widower? My father. Your father. My father. Your great-granddad Garrett. He had buried his wife 11 months before that morning, and the whole town believed he had put her in the ground with his own rifle. Caleb closed his fingers around the folding knife. Tobias' 3 things came up this road that summer. A wagon dropped her off. A man with a silver chain on his vest came to take our family. And a woman walked 5 miles in the heat to save us. 5 miles in the heat, in a gray dress, in boots not made for walking. She did not stop once. She did not cry once. I know because I am the boy who watched her come out of the cottonwoods and stand at the edge of our yard. I was 8 years old, and I had not seen my little sister speak in 11 months, and I had not seen my father eat a proper meal in 11 months, and I had forgotten that God was real. And then she came. The boy waited. Caleb opened his hand again. The knife sat there like a small, dark animal. I will tell you the rest, but first you have to understand what this knife is. Because the knife is the thread that holds the whole story together. My grandfather gave this to my father the day he rode out for Shiloh in 1862. Your great-granddad was 21. He came back with a bullet hole in his thigh, and a scar along his jaw, and a friend named Burnett Bellwether, who had carried him out of that field on his back. My father gave me this knife the night your great-grandma Clara stood in the kitchen window with a rifle in her hands. I was 8. I carried it to Cuba 20 years later. Your cousin Garrett carried it to France this spring. Caleb's voice did not break. It only slowed. They sent it back to me last week, Tobias, in a small paper envelope, with a letter. The boy looked at the knife and then up at his uncle, and then at the lilac. And he did not say anything because he was 10 years old, and he understood the way children understand that he had walked into a room of grown men, and the room was holding its breath. So I will tell you about that summer, Caleb said. I will tell you because your mother is right, and because the lilac is blooming, and because somewhere inside that house, your grandmother is knitting socks for a boy who does not need them anymore. And I do not yet have the strength to walk in there and break her heart. I will tell you while the sun is still up. Will you sit with me, son? Yes, sir. Then I will start with the wagon, because that is where it started for all of us. 1878. The hottest July anyone in Cottonwood County could remember. And a girl named Clara Whitfield, 24 years old, with no people left in the world. The lilac swayed once more, and the kitchen window framed his mother's white head, bent over the wool, and Caleb Ashford began to tell his nephew the story of the woman who had come. The dust had not yet settled when the driver flung her carpet bag at her boots. Clara Whitfield did not bend to pick it up. She stood in the wide dirt street of Willow Creek with her hands clasped in front of her gray dress, and she watched the wagon roll away from her, and she did not call after it again. She had called after it once. Once was all the begging she would do that day. Once she had decided already was all the begging she would do the rest of her life. The driver, Carter, had told her she was in Willow Creek. He had told her the Ashford place was 5 miles south. Follow the creek, walk fast. The heat will cook you by 3. He had spit over the side of the buckboard and slapped the reins, and the wagon had gone. And now she stood alone in a town that had not yet learned her name, and had already decided she was nothing. A woman on the boardwalk in front of the dry goods store spit into the dust and said loud enough to carry, "Lord help that poor widower's children." 2 boys behind a horse trough giggled and ducked. A man with a tin star on his vest leaned against a porch post and watched her without speaking. He did not move. He did not call out. He only watched. Clara bent and picked up her bag. She had buried her father 6 weeks ago in a Lutheran churchyard in St. Louis. She had buried her mother 9 years before that. She had a sister named Mary in the same yard who had died at 11 of scarlet fever, and Clara had been 16 and had held her hand and watched her go. The Beecham Agency on Olive Street had called her into their parlor 4 days after the burial. A woman in spectacles had handed her a folded letter and said, "We have a position in the country, child. We think you are suited." Clara had not asked what was meant by suited. She had taken the letter and gone home and packed her father's Bible and the $20 she had sewn into the hem of her mourning dress, and a brass thimble that had belonged to her mother. That was the inventory of her life on the morning she stepped off the wagon at Willow Creek. She walked toward the boardwalk. Her boots were loud on the dry planks. She stopped at the foot of the steps and lifted her face to the woman who had spit. "Pardon me, ma'am." The woman lowered her hand. She was tall in a faded blue dress, and her eyes flicked away the moment Clara met them. "Yes, child. I am to go to Mr. Garrett Ashford's place. Could you direct me?" The boardwalk went very still. A fly landed on the railing. The man with the tin star did not move from his post, but Clara felt him watching the back of her neck. The woman in blue stepped down to her level. Up close, she had a face that had been kind once and was now mostly tired, and her eyes, when they did finally find Clara's, were the eyes of a woman who had been waiting 24 years for something she could not name. "Sweetheart," she said, "has anyone told you about that place?" "I've been told what I need to know, ma'am." "Have you been told about his wife?" Clara swallowed. "The agent said she had passed." "She passed?" The woman's mouth twisted. "That is one way to put it. Hattie." The man with the tin star pushed off the porch post. "Leave the girl be. Burnett, I will not leave her be. It ain't your business, woman, nor mine." 3 children, Burnett Bellwether. 3 motherless children and that man up there. You know what is said. I know what is said. And I know what is not proved. Clara watched them speak past her, and she felt the heat of the road behind her shoulders, and she felt the silver of the brooch in her hair, where her mother had once worn it, and she felt suddenly the way a deer must feel when it walks into a clearing and discovers the clearing is full of men. The woman in blue turned back to her. Her hand came up. It hovered near Clara's face, not touching, only near, and her eyes had stopped on the brooch. "Child," she said, and her voice had changed. "That brooch. My mother's, ma'am. What was your mother's name?" "Elizabeth Whitfield." The woman in blue made a small sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when they have been struck in the stomach without warning. Her hand fell to her side. Her eyes filled and overflowed, and she did nothing to stop them. And before she married child, Eliza Sutton, she came from Independence. Why do you... Sweet Jesus. The woman pressed both her hands flat against her mouth. Sweet Jesus in heaven, Eliza. Eliza, I am sorry. Eliza, I am so sorry. Clara did not understand. She could not understand. She was 24 years old, and she had been thrown off a wagon an hour ago, and she had no people in the world, and a strange woman in a faded blue dress was weeping in front of her on a boardwalk in a town she had never seen. The sheriff had taken a step toward them and stopped. His face had gone the color of old ash. He looked at Clara, and he looked at the brooch in her hair, and he closed his eyes for one long second. The woman in blue lowered her hands. She was not smiling. She was not anything yet. She reached into her own dress pocket and brought out a piece of hard candy wrapped in wax paper. She pressed it into Clara's free hand and held Clara's fingers closed around it with both of her own. My name is Hattie Bellwether, she said. I keep house in that blue door behind the church. You will hear of me. You will hear other things first. Remember me. Remember the blue door. Do you hear, child? Yes, ma'am. You are not anybody's property. Whatever they tell you up at that place, whatever the contract says, the Lord made you free, and paper is only paper. Do you hear? Yes, ma'am. You go on now. Follow the creek. The fence will be broken on the west side. The house is past the cottonwoods. You go on. Clara walked. She could not have said afterward what she thought as she walked, only that she had a piece of hard candy melting in her fist and a brooch in her hair that had made a stranger weep, and her father's letter folded against her breastbone, and she put one boot in front of the other for 5 miles under a sun that did indeed try to cook her by 3. She crossed the creek at a low place where the stones showed white through the water. She saw the broken fence on the west side. She stopped at the edge of the cottonwoods. She pressed her palm flat against her chest, where the letter sat folded over her heart, and she whispered to her father what she had been whispering since she left the city. Be useful, child. Be honest. Be brave. The Lord will set a place for you. A crow called once from the high branches. It sounded like a question. Clara stepped out of the trees and into the yard. A boy was sitting on the top rail of the corral. He was 8 years old, brown from the sun, barefoot, kicking his heels against the wood in a slow, steady rhythm. He saw her and the rhythm stopped, and he went perfectly still the way a rabbit goes still in long grass. "Hello," she called. The boy slid off the rail and ran for the house. And as he ran, he was already shouting, "Papa, she is here." A door opened. A dog barked somewhere out by the barn. Somewhere inside the house, a small child began to cry low and exhausted, as if the crying had been going on a long time, and had only now become audible to the world. Clara stopped 20 feet from the porch. She set her bag down in the dust beside her boot. The man who came out of the house was younger than the agent had described. He was younger than the rumor had described. He was tall, and the cords in his neck and forearms were the cords of a man who had worked outdoors since boyhood. And his face was the face of a man who had not slept properly in 11 months. He wore shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. He carried no weapon. He stopped at the top step of the porch and his eyes did not leave her. There was a scar along the right side of his jaw. Pale raised the length of a man's thumb. Not the kind of scar a knife makes. The kind a piece of iron makes going past a face too fast for the face to get out of the way. He spoke first. "You are the woman." "Yes, sir." "Clara Whitfield. You are a week early." The agent said the 15th. "It is the 8th." She felt the blood leave her face for the second time that day. She said nothing. "Where is Carter?" "He left me in town. He said his contract was to Willow Creek." The man's eyes closed for one long second. Something in his face hardened not against her. She understood somehow, but against the world that had put a young woman on his road in this heat without warning. When he opened his eyes again, he came down the porch steps in 4 long strides and crossed the yard and picked up her bag without asking and without looking at her. "Caleb," he said. "Yes, Pa." The boy on the porch. "Get the dipper. Cold water. From the spring house. Now." "Yes, Pa." Gone. The man turned back to her. He did not offer his hand. He did not soften his voice. "My name is Garrett Ashford. You will call me Mr. Ashford." "Yes, Mr. Ashford." "My oldest is Ruby. She is 11. The boy is Caleb. He is 8. The little one is June. She is 5. He paused. The pause was long. "She does not speak. Do not push her." "No, sir." "I asked the agency for a woman of 40. They sent you." "Yes, sir." "How old are you, Miss Whitfield?" 24, Mr. Ashford." "I can see that." She kept her eyes level. She had been 24 for 6 months, and she had decided already that she would not apologize for it to any man in any kitchen in any state. "I've kept a house since I was 12, Mr. Ashford. My mother died when I was 15. I cared for my father 7 years. I can cook, I can sew, I can read and write a letter. I can bake bread without burning it, and I can bind a wound, and I can—" "Miss Whitfield." She stopped. "You do not have to sell yourself on my porch." The boy Caleb came back with the dipper. The man took it and gave it to her, and she drank the cold water of his spring in 3 slow swallows, and she felt it move down through her ribs and into her stomach, and she felt for the first time since the wagon the possibility that she might not fall down today. She handed the dipper back. "Mr. Ashford, if I am not what you expected, I will go back to town tonight. I will not hold you to the contract." He looked at her a long time. He looked at her boots. He looked at the dust on the hem of her dress. He looked finally at the brooch in her hair, the way the sun caught the silver of the magnolia. Something passed behind his eyes that she could not read. "You walked 5 miles, Miss Whitfield." "Yes, sir." "You are not going anywhere tonight." "Yes, sir." "Caleb, show Miss Whitfield the room off the kitchen, the one that was your Aunt Edna's." "Yes, Pa." "And tell your sisters to come out here." "They will not, Pa." "Tell them anyway." The boy ran. Clara picked up her own bag before the man could take it again, and she carried it past him up the porch steps and into the house. The kitchen had not been swept in a long time. 3 plates sat on the table set out as if for a meal, and not one of them was clean. The smell of the room was the smell of a house in which the woman of it had gone. The smell of a thing that had stopped being kept and had only been used. Clara set her bag inside the door of the small room off the kitchen. She did not sit down. The boy came back. He stood at the doorway watching her. "Caleb." "Yes, miss." "Have you eaten today?" His face went very still in the way of a child who has been taught that a wrong answer brings down a wrong thing. Pa was gonna make something. What time was that? This morning. And it is now afternoon. Pa got busy. She knelt slowly so her face came level with his. She reached and brushed a smudge of dust off his cheek with her thumb. He flinched not from fear, she understood, from the simple shock of being touched gently. He had not been touched gently in some time. "Caleb," she said. "Yes, miss." "Where is your sister June?" "Under the bed." "Whose bed?" "Hers and Ruby's." "Why?" The boy's eyes filled. He turned his face away fast. "She does that when folks come, miss. She just does." Clara stood up. She rolled the sleeves of her gray dress to her elbows. She walked into the kitchen and put her hands flat on the table and breathed in once and breathed out once and let herself feel for one moment everything she had refused to feel since dawn. Then she opened her eyes. "Caleb." "Yes, miss." "Is there flour in this kitchen?" "In the bin." "Eggs?" "Some." "Bacon?" in the smokehouse. Then you go fetch your father. You tell him Miss Whitfield is making the children's supper. You tell him he is welcome to join them. And you tell him I will not be answering any more questions tonight. Do you hear?" The boy stared at her. "Yes, miss." "Go." He ran. She had supper on the table in 40 minutes. Biscuits, bacon, 3 eggs scrambled and the last of the milk. She set 4 places at the table. She did not set one for June. She placed a small plate of biscuit and bacon on the chair, just outside the bedroom door, where a child hiding under a bed would find it if she chose to come out. Garrett Ashford came in from the yard. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at the table. He did not speak. "Mr. Ashford." He did not move. "Sit down, please. The food will get cold." He sat. Ruby came out of the bedroom and stopped at the edge of the kitchen and stared at Clara the way a sentry stares at an enemy column. She was tall for 11, thin as a reed hair, the color of dry winter grass, eyes too old. "Ruby," her father said, "I am not hungry." "Ruby." "I am not hungry, Pa." Clara pulled out the chair beside her own. "Miss Ruby." The girl turned her eyes on her. "I made enough for everybody. If you do not eat, the dog will, and the dog does not need it. Sit, please. You are not my mother." "No, ma'am, I am not. And I will never speak that word in this kitchen. I will not stand at her grave. I will not wear her dresses. I will not touch a single thing in this house that was hers without your blessing." Clara folded her hands at the back of the chair. "But I will put a biscuit in front of a hungry child, and I will not be told no twice. Sit down." The girl's mouth opened and closed. She sat. Caleb sat without being told. The man at the head of the table picked up his fork, set it down, picked it up again. He put his other hand briefly over his mouth as if to hold back a word, and then he ate. They ate in silence. When they were finished, Clara cleared the plates and washed them in the basin and dried them on a flour sack and put them on the shelf. She wiped the table down. She did not look at the chair beside the bedroom door. But when she walked past it on her way to fetch the water bucket, the plate was empty, and 3 crumbs of biscuit lay in a small, careful pile beside it, as if someone had wished to leave evidence of gratitude. She did not say one word about it. She went out into the dusk and brought in firewood. She trimmed the lamp. She set the kettle for morning. She walked into the small room off the kitchen at full dark and sat on the edge of the narrow bed and opened her carpet bag and took out her father's letter and pressed it against her face and breathed in the last smell of him, pipe tobacco, old paper, the faint smell of communion wine that had soaked into the lining of his coat over 40 years. She did not cry. She did not cry because she could hear through the thin board wall behind her head a small child weeping into a pillow. Clara folded the letter. She put it back in the bag. She walked out of her room across the kitchen to the children's bedroom door, and she pushed it open without knocking. A small shape on the bed went still under the quilt. "June." The shape did not move. June, my name is Clara. You do not have to speak to me. You do not have to come out. I have only come to tell you something. She sat down on the floor beside the bed. The boards were cool through her dress. My mother died when I was 15. I was too old to hide under a bed by then. But I wanted to. For 3 years, I wanted to. Do you know what I did instead? The quilt did not move. I made myself a little house under my mother's old shawl. I would put it over my head when I needed to disappear. Nobody could see me under there. It was just me and the smell of her. And I would stay there until I was ready to come out. A small, wet sniffle. Very faint. Tomorrow, if you would like, we can find you a shawl. You can keep it under your pillow. And when folks come and you do not want to see them, you can put it over your head. And I will tell them you are not here. I will tell them you have gone away to find the angels. Would that be all right? A long silence, then very small from under the quilt, in a voice that was hoarse from not being used. Even Pa? Clara pressed her hand flat against her own mouth. She kept it there a long moment. Even your Pa, she whispered. If you want. Don't tell. Don't tell what, sweetheart? That I talked. I will not tell a soul. I swear it on my mother's grave. She sat there on the floor in the dark for a long time until the small breathing on the bed slowed and finally evened into sleep. Then she stood and walked out and shut the door without a sound. Garrett Ashford was standing in the kitchen. He had a candle in his hand. His face was the face of a man who had just walked in on something he could not quite believe. Miss Whitfield? Yes, Mr. Ashford. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. My daughter has not spoken since her mother died. Not to me. Not to her sister. Not to a doctor I drove 40 miles to find. 11 months. Yes, Mr. Ashford. And you. I made her a promise, Mr. Ashford. The candle in his hand shook once, and then steadied. What promise? That I would not tell a soul that she spoke tonight. And I will not. Not even you. He looked at her. The candle flame leaned and straightened with his breath. Miss Whitfield. Yes, sir. I do not know what you are. I am a woman who walked 5 miles in the heat, Mr. Ashford. I am tired. I would like to go to bed. She started past him. He spoke once more very quietly to the empty kitchen behind her. They will be here in the morning. She stopped. She did not turn. What men, Mr. Ashford? From town. They come every Saturday. They bring papers. What kind of papers? The kind that say I am not fit. The kind that say my children belong elsewhere. And what do you tell those papers? I tell them to come back next week. And next week? He did not answer. She turned now and faced him in the candlelight. Mr. Ashford, in the morning when those men come, you will let me speak. Miss Whitfield. You will let me speak, Mr. Ashford. I am the new help in this house. I have a contract. I have a letter from a licensed agency in St. Louis, and I am going to stand on this porch tomorrow morning, and I am going to tell those men exactly what I have seen in this house tonight. I have seen a man feed his children. I have seen a little girl speak for the first time in 11 months, and I will swear to it on a Bible in front of any judge that comes up that road. He looked at her as if she had struck him. You do not know me, he said. I know you walked from your supper plate to a bedroom door because a child was crying, Mr. Ashford. I saw your candle. That is enough for tonight. He did not answer. She walked past him into her small room, and she closed the door, and she sat down on the narrow bed, with her hands folded in her lap. And somewhere far out across the cottonwoods an owl called once. She did not lie down. She did not undress. She sat on top of the quilt in her gray dress and her boots, and she waited for morning. Tonight the candle in Garrett Ashford's hand went out, and the man stood alone in his dark kitchen for a long time, and Clara Whitfield sat on her narrow bed in the small room off that kitchen, and neither of them slept, and the lilac in the back garden bloomed quietly in the heat. For the first of 3 times in its life, it would bloom out of season, and no one in the house yet knew it was blooming at all. Clara did not sleep. She sat on the quilt in her gray dress until the first gray light touched the small window, and then she stood and smoothed her skirt and pressed her hands flat against her knees. And she made a list inside her head of every single thing she would say to the men who would come up the road that morning. She was on the 3rd item when the door of her small room creaked open. June stood in the doorway. The child was in a nightgown 2 sizes too big for her, and she held the quilt against her chest, the way a soldier holds a flag, and her eyes were huge in the dim light. You said a shawl, she whispered. I did. There is not one. Then we will use the quilt. Come here, sweetheart. June crossed the floor on bare feet. Clara held out her arms without a word. The child climbed into her lap and put her face against the rough gray cloth of the dress and stayed there. Clara felt the small bones under her hands. She felt them the way a man feels the trigger of a rifle when he has not yet decided whether to fire with full attention, with full responsibility, with a tenderness that has gone past tenderness into something nearer to oath. June. A knot against her collarbone. How long since you slept a whole night? The child held up 4 fingers. 4 nights. A shake of the head. 4 months. Clara pressed her cheek against the top of the small head and did not speak for a long time. June. Today, when those men come, you will stay in this room with me. Do you hear? What men? The men your pa told me about last night. The child went rigid in her lap. The man with the silver chain. Clara went very still. What silver chain, sweetheart? On his vest. He has a silver chain. He smells bad. Who is he, baby? Mama's brother. The whole small room went quiet around them. Clara heard her own pulse for the first time since she had stepped off the wagon. June, your pa has not told me about your mama's brother. What is his name? Sutton. Has he come to this house before? A nod. How does he come, sweetheart? He brings a doll. I don't take it. The child's voice was very flat, the way the voices of small children go flat. When they are saying something they do not have the words to say bigger. Clara held her a little tighter. She stared at the gray window. She did not trust her voice. When she did finally speak, it was very level. June, listen to me. Today, when that man comes up the road, he will not see you. He will not put his hand on you. He will not put a doll on this porch. Not today. Not ever again. He always sees me. Not today, baby. Why? Because today I am here. The child was silent. Then, Miss. Yes, sweetheart. You smell like soap. Yes, baby. Mama smelled like soap. Clara did not trust her voice for a long minute. The brooch in her hair caught a small piece of the gray light coming through the window and threw it onto the wall, and she watched the small, bright shape of a magnolia tremble there a moment. And she thought of a woman in a faded blue dress weeping on a boardwalk yesterday. And she thought of a name a stranger had said, as if she were striking it. Eliza, Eliza, I am sorry. She set June down gently on the bed. I'm gonna make breakfast, she said. You stay right here under that quilt. I will bring you a biscuit. With butter. With butter, sweetheart. She walked into the kitchen and pressed both hands flat against the table, and she breathed slow until the burning behind her eyes stopped. And then she lit the stove. She had biscuits and gravy on the table by the time the sun cleared the cottonwoods. Ruby came out of the bedroom in a calico dress, with the hem coming down on one side, and she stopped in the kitchen doorway, and she crossed her thin arms across her chest, and she looked at Clara the way she had looked at her the night before. You are still here. I am. Pa said you might leave. I might, just not this morning. Why? Because there are biscuits on the table and they need eating. I'm not hungry. You said that last night. The girl's mouth tightened. Clara set down the dish towel and turned to her square on. Miss Ruby. What? Sit down. Ruby sat. She did not eat right away. She watched Clara the way a young dog watches a stranger near its bowl. Caleb was already at the table. He ate quickly without looking up the way a boy eats when he has learned that food may go away if he stops to ask why it is there. Garrett Ashford came in from the yard. He smelled of horses and of cold morning. He stopped in the doorway and looked at the table and did not speak. Mr. Ashford. Miss. Sit down, please. I ate already. What did you eat? He did not answer. Sit down, Mr. Ashford. He sat. She put a plate in front of him. He picked up his fork, set it down, picked it up again. He ate. When the boy was finished, she sent him out for kindling. When Ruby was finished, she sent her into the back garden with the laundry basket. and told her not to come around to the front of the house no matter what she heard. June she put back under the quilt in the small room off the kitchen with the door shut tight and a biscuit in each fist. Then she turned to the man at her table. "Mr. Ashford." "Yes." "When they come, you will let me speak." "Miss, you will let me speak. And before they come, I have one thing to ask you." He waited. "You were a soldier." His head came up. The fork in his hand stopped above the plate. "That is not a question." "No, sir, it is not. Your wife had words engraved on the back of your watch. Returned with honors. I saw it when you bent for my bag yesterday." He did not answer for a long moment. "Shiloh," he said at last, 16 years ago. I am not that man anymore. That man is still in you, Mr. Ashford. Today you will need him." He looked at her across the table. He looked at her a long time. His hand on the fork relaxed, and he set it down on the plate, and he nodded once. "I will mind my coat," he said. "Thank you, Mr. Ashford." She put a clean shirt on him. She put his good coat on him. She brushed his boots herself with a rag. She tied her own hair tight back and pinned the magnolia brooch into the braid so it sat where any man riding up that road would see it. At 9 o'clock she heard the hooves. "You have done a kindness for this family today." "Yes, sir." "You will be paid for it. $8 a month, I believe." "Yes, sir." $8 buys a great many things in this country. A sack of flour, a winter coat, a one-way ticket on the eastbound stage from this very town. He let it sit on the porch boards a long moment. "I will bear that in mind, sir." "You do that, miss." He started to mount. He stopped halfway. He turned back, and his eyes had gone to a place Clara did not yet understand, and his voice dropped half a register. "Ashford." "Sutton." A word man to man. "Sutton, you paid the Tucker boy $300 to ride to Shiloh in your place in '62. He died at Vicksburg the next year. You do not speak to me man to man on the porch of my own house. Get on your horse." The yard went very still. Sutton's face did not move, but the color came up under his collar in two slow, uneven patches, and his hand on the saddle horn tightened. And Clara saw and would remember every day of her life afterward that the silver chain across his vest trembled very slightly with the rise and fall of his breath. He mounted. He tipped his hat 1 inch again to no one in particular. He rode. Clara stood on the porch with the contract folded in her hand and watched the dust settle, and her knees gave and Garrett Ashford caught her elbow before she hit the boards. "Miss Whitfield." "I am all right." "Sit." She sat on the top step. He stood 3 feet from her with his hands on his hips, and he looked out at the road for a long time before he said anything. "How many Saturdays, Mr. Ashford?" 11. "And every Saturday you have stood on this porch alone?" "Yes." "Mr. Ashford?" "Yes." "You should have written the agency in March and demanded a woman by April." I know it. Why did you not? He was silent a long time. I did not believe a woman would come, Miss Whitfield. Not with what is said about me in that town. Not with what is said about my wife. She looked up at him. What is said about your wife? He did not answer. Mr. Ashford, I have just stood on this porch and lied for you. You did not lie. I have allowed a judge of the state of Missouri to believe I am a hired companion in a respectable Christian household. I have not asked you any of the questions that woman in the blue dress in Willow Creek wanted me to ask you. I have done all of that, Mr. Ashford, on the strength of a candle I saw you carry to a bedroom door. Now you will tell me what is said about your wife. He pressed his hand against his mouth. He looked at the lilac in the back garden, the pale clusters drooping in the heat. He spoke without looking at her. It is said in that town that I shot her. The whole world went very, very quiet. And did you know Miss Whitfield? Then who did? No one shot her. That is what I have told myself and the children and the preacher, who would not say words over her. No one shot her. That is not an answer, Mr. Ashford. He turned and looked down at her. His face had gone the color of old ash. The truth, Miss Whitfield, is that my wife, Eleanor Sutton Ashford, took down the rifle from above this door on a winter morning 11 months ago, while I was in the south pasture. She walked out into the cottonwoods. She did not come back. And our youngest, who was 4 years old, found her in the snow. Clara pressed her hand against her mouth, and the town knows that my wife is dead, that there was a rifle, that I was alone on the place, that I did not call for the doctor for 2 hours because I was looking for June in the snow. And the town knows that her brother Harlan is the executor of her estate, and the guardian named in her will should I be found unfit. And the town has chosen Miss Whitfield to side with the man who wears a silver chain. You buried her in the back garden, Mr. Ashford. Yes. Under the lilac. Yes. Does June know? June planted the lilac. Clara put her face in her hands. She kept it there. He stood 3 feet away and did not move. Miss Whitfield. Yes, Mr. Ashford. You may take the wagon to town tomorrow. There is fare to St. Louis in my desk drawer. I will tell the agency you were not suited. She lifted her face. There were no tears on it. There had not been time for tears. Mr. Ashford. Miss. Where is Ruby? In the back garden. And Caleb. At the woodpile. And June. In your bed. Then, Mr. Ashford, with your permission, I am going to fetch June out of my bed. I am going to put on a clean apron. I am going to make a stew for supper. Because there is laundry on the line, and kindling at the woodpile, and a child in my bed who slept 4 hours last night for the first time in 4 months. And I will not be on the eastbound stage in the morning. I will be making biscuits. He stared at her. Miss Whitfield. Yes, sir. I cannot pay you any more than what is on that contract. I have not asked for more. I cannot promise that man will not come back. I expect he will. He closed his eyes. He kept them closed. She stood up. Mr. Ashford, there is one more thing. Yes. The woman in town who wears the faded blue dress. Hattie Bellwether. She is your wife's cousin. My wife's cousin by marriage. Her husband, Burnett, is the sheriff. And yesterday on the boardwalk, sir, when I told her my mother's name, she said, "Eliza, I am sorry." And she wept on a public street. And she pressed candy into my hand and called me child. He looked at her. He looked at the brooch in her hair. Miss Whitfield. Yes, Mr. Ashford. There is something I do not know then. There is something I do not know either. And I will know it before this week is out. She walked back into the house. She brought June out of the small room. She set her at the kitchen table with a bowl of milk and a biscuit. She tied an apron over her gray dress, the magnolia still pinned in her hair. And she walked out into the back garden where Ruby was on her knees in the dirt, with a wet sheet in her hands. And she knelt down beside the girl without a word. Miss Ruby, I am fine. I know you are. I do not need help. I know you do not. The girl twisted the sheet in her hands until her knuckles went white. She did not look up. He is coming back. Yes, ma'am, he is. He always comes back. I know it. Last time he tried to take June, Clara went very still. What? He tried to put her in his buggy. He said she was not safe here. He said Pa was not right in the head. He said the judge had given him papers, only he did not have papers, he just said they were coming. June bit him. She bit him on the hand, and he hit her, and Pa came out of the barn, and Ruby's voice broke for the first time. Pa would have killed him in the yard. He had the rifle on him. I screamed. Pa stopped because I screamed. And next time he will not come on a Saturday with the judge. He will come on a Tuesday with the sheriff and a paper that is real. Clara took the wet sheet out of the girl's hands and laid it in the basket. Miss Ruby. Yes. Listen to me. That man is not gonna take your sister. Miss, he is not going to take you. He is not going to take Caleb. He is not going to take this place. And he is not going to come up that road one more time without an answer. You do not know him, miss. I know enough, Ruby. The girl made a small sound, half laugh, half sob, the noise a young animal makes when it discovers a new kind of fence. He has got the bank, he has got the church, he has got the post office. And we have got a judge who is tired of being lied to, Ruby. We have got an agency in St. Louis that is not in your uncle's pocket. We have got a cousin in town who put candy in my hand. And we have got a contract that says I have a year in this house. A year is a great deal of time. The girl looked up. You are not going. No, ma'am. He told you to go. He did. Why did you not? Clara was quiet a moment, kneeling there in the dirt of the back garden in her gray dress, the lilac just behind the girl's shoulder. Because, Miss Ruby, I have nowhere else to be. and because I had a sister your age in a churchyard in St. Louis, and because I held my mother's hand when she died, and because I will not in this lifetime walk away from a house where a child planted a lilac on her own mother's grave. The girl made a noise. Clara pulled her in. The 11-year-old cried into her shoulder for a long time, hard, racking sobs of a child who had not been allowed to cry inside the four walls of her own house in 11 months. Clara held her. The wet sheets stayed in the basket. The sun rose higher. Somewhere in the house, June was sleeping for the second time in 4 months. And somewhere on the road back to town, a man with a silver chain across his vest was riding in a slow simmer of a rage that would by nightfall have moved past rage and into the colder country of plan. When the girl was done, she pulled back and wiped her face on her sleeve, and Clara wiped her own face once with the back of her wrist, and the two of them sat on their heels in the dirt and looked at each other. Miss Clara, yes, baby. There is a thing in the barn. Clara went still in the way the air goes still before a storm front turns. What kind of thing? In the loft, under the third board from the back wall. Mama put it there. What is it? I do not know. I never lifted the board. But the day before she went out with the rifle, Mama took me up to the loft. She lifted the board. She put a tin box under it. She said, Ruby, if anything happens to me, do not give this to your uncle. Do not give it to anyone. Wait for a woman who is not afraid of him. Give it to her. Clara felt the blood leave her face for the third time in 2 days. Miss Ruby. Yes. Has anyone touched that board? No, miss. Pa does not go up there. Uncle Harlan has never been in our barn. Caleb cannot reach the ladder. After supper, when June is asleep, you and I will go to the barn. The girl looked at her with eyes that had gone suddenly, and entirely the eyes of a woman. Yes, miss. Clara stood up. She brushed off her gray dress. She picked up the basket of wet sheets. She walked back into the kitchen with the cold white anger still sitting in her chest like a banked fire. And she hung the sheets on the line, and she put salt in the stew pot. And she did not look once at the lilac, or at the road, or at the long empty horizon, where a man with a silver chain was even now bending over a desk in a bank office. She had a stew to make. She would have an hour by her count after the children were in bed. 1 hour to climb a ladder. 1 hour to lift a board. She fed the children. She kept her voice level. She kept her hands steady. The stew was good bacon and onion, and the last of the spring potatoes, and June ate 3 spoonfuls before she set the spoon down and slid off her chair and walked across the kitchen floor on her bare feet and climbed into Garrett Ashford's lap without a word. He did not move. His hand was halfway to his mouth with his own spoon. He stopped. The spoon sat in the air between his face and the bowl. The child reached up, took the spoon out of his hand, dipped it into his stew, and put it into her own mouth. Garrett Ashford closed his eyes. When he opened them, there were tears running down his face into his beard. and he did not seem to know they were there. And he wrapped both his arms around his 5-year-old daughter and held her against his chest and did not let her go. Ruby stopped chewing. Caleb stopped chewing. Clara stood at the basin with her hands in dishwater and her back to the table, and she did not turn around. She heard the man press his face into the small head of his daughter. She heard him breathe in once and hold it. She heard the child sigh against his shirt, the way a child sighs when she has put down a heavy thing she should never have been asked to carry. 40 years later, on the porch in 1918, Caleb Ashford would tell his nephew Tobias, "I was 8 years old. That was the moment my father was given permission to be a father again. He had lost my mother. But from that moment with my sister on his lap, he was not alone." That night after the children were in bed, Clara walked into the children's room and laid her hand on Garrett Ashford's shoulder, and he turned his face up to her in the candlelight. "Mr. Ashford, Miss, Ruby and I are going to the barn." He stood. He did not ask why. He looked at her face and he nodded once, and he picked up the candle and he walked behind her out of the room. Ruby met them at the barn door with her own candle and her sleeves already rolled. The barn was warm with the breath of 2 horses and a milk cow and the soft rustle of straw. Clara climbed first. Ruby climbed behind her. Garrett stood at the foot of the ladder with the lantern raised. Ruby crossed the boards on her knees and pressed her thumbnail under the edge of the 3rd board from the back wall. "Here, miss. Lift it slow." The board came up. Packed in straw beneath it lay a tin biscuit box. The lid was green. Ruby's hands shook. She did not touch it. "That is hers. I know it is, baby. Open it." Clara lifted the lid. The first thing in the box was a paper folded in 4ths. The second was a stack of letters tied with brown string. The third was a small leather ledger. The 4th, at the very bottom, was a velvet pouch the size of a goose egg. Clara took out the folded paper and held it to her candle. It was a will. It was dated November the 4th, 1877, 3 weeks before Eleanor Sutton Ashford walked out into the cottonwoods with a rifle. It was witnessed by 2 names, H. Bellwether and M. Lindquist. It was signed by a woman called Eleanor Sutton Ashford, in a hand that was firm and angry and absolutely certain of itself. The will revoked all previous wills. The will named Garrett Ashford as the sole guardian of all 3 children. No exceptions, no conditions. The will named the Beecham Agency of Olive Street, St. Louis, as the executor of her personal estate in trust for her children until each reached majority. The will named her brother, Mr. Harlan Sutton of the First Bank of Willow Creek, as a person against whom no inheritance, no guardianship, no claim of any kind whatsoever was to be granted on grounds of theft from the estate of their late father, the Reverend Obadiah Sutton, and on grounds of acts against the person of the testator and her children. Clara sat down on the boards of the loft because her legs would not hold her up. "Ruby." "Yes, miss." "Your uncle does not own 1 acre of this place. Not 1 brick. Not 1 fence post. He told Pa he did. Yes, baby, he did, and he was lying, and he has been lying for 11 months. The girl pressed both hands flat against her own mouth and made no sound at all. Clara untied the brown string on the letters. There were 8 of them. She read them in order by the candle. September. A request for the names of 3 women of 40 or older. October. Harlan Sutton had been intercepting her correspondence. Early November. Eleanor had located evidence of 3 accounts opened in her father's name and emptied over 7 years. She had retained an attorney in Jefferson City named Jameson Pike. The 4th letter. 4 days later. Jameson Pike was dead. The 5th. Eleanor had been threatened. The 6th. Her children had been threatened. The 7th. I cannot tell my husband. He will kill my brother and hang for it. He is a soldier. The Union Army does not forgive an officer who kills a man for family. The 8th. Dated the morning of the 22nd of November, 1877. Clara read it aloud very softly by the candle. If a woman of any age comes to you in the next 12 months, and her name is not Greta Lindquist, you are to send her to me at any cost. I do not care what she has done or who she is. If she is a woman with no people in this world, and a willingness to keep her mouth shut, send her. The will is in the loft of the barn under the 3rd board from the back wall. The ledger is with it. There is enough in that ledger to hang my brother twice. Tell her she will know me when she sees the lilac. Clara set the letter down on the boards beside her knee. Ruby was crying without sound. Down at the foot of the ladder, Garrett Ashford had gone perfectly still. He had heard the last letter. Clara picked up the leather ledger. The total at the bottom of the 2nd page was $18,412. She lifted out the velvet pouch. A wedding ring plain gold. A lock of pale hair tied with a thread. And a small brass key. She held the key up to the candle. Mr. Ashford. He was already climbing. He came up onto the boards of the loft and sat on his heels beside her and looked at the key in her palm without touching it. Miss, this is the key to your father-in-law's safe, sir. The one Harlan Sutton told you was empty. His mouth worked once. He did not answer. Where is your father-in-law's safe? In the first bank of Willow Creek, miss, Harlan's bank. And the bank in Stone Hollow. He looked up at her. There is a private box. In the name of the Reverend Obadiah Sutton. In the name of the Reverend Obadiah Sutton. She closed her hand around the key. Mr. Ashford, your father-in-law did not trust his son. He kept his accounts in his daughter's name. He kept a private box in another town. He told me, miss, before he died. He told me I did not understand. I thought he was an old man, worried over nothing. He was not worried over nothing, sir. He pressed his palm against his eyes. My God. She handed him the will. She handed him the ledger. He read the will 3 times. He looked at her. Miss Whitfield, Yes, my wife did not leave me. No, Mr. Ashford, she did not. My wife was murdered. Yes, sir. He closed his eyes. He kept them closed a long time. And in that loft by that single lantern, the 11 months in Garrett Ashford's face loosened. They did not fall away. They would never fall away. But they loosened. When he opened his eyes, he was a different man than the one who had climbed the ladder. What do? We copy every letter in this box tonight. We hide the copies in the cellar. The original goes back under that board until first light. And at sunrise, Mr. Ashford, you put Ruby on the bay horse, and you ride for Stone Hollow. He nodded once. They had been copying letters at the kitchen table for half an hour. When they heard the second horse, it came up the creek road at a slow walk. One horse, one rider. Garrett Ashford set down his pen. That is not the bay. No. That is not Sutton's chestnut either. No, sir. He stood. He took down the rifle from above the door. He handed Ruby the second rifle from the cabinet, and she checked it the way an 11-year-old does not, with the steady fingers of a child who had been taught by her father and her mother both. He went out onto the porch with the rifle across his arm in the dark. Clara stood at the kitchen window with the curtain drawn back 1 inch. The horse came into the yard. It was a tall gray gelding. The man on it was big and gray-mustached, and he had a tin star on his vest, and he had no rifle drawn. He stopped his horse 20 feet from the porch. He raised both his hands so they could be seen. Ashford, Bellwether, I am alone. You are not alone enough for me, Burnett. Listen to me. I am listening from this porch with a rifle across my arm. Speak. The sheriff lowered his hands slowly. Garrett, 16 years ago, I carried you out of a wheat field at Shiloh with a rebel bullet in your thigh. Your fever ran 3 nights. I dripped water across your lips 1 finger at a time. I swore on the only thing I called a soul, that if you lived, I would not betray you. And I have betrayed you for 11 months. Garrett Ashford, I have known what my brother-in-law did from the morning of the snow, because my own deputy was on the ridge that morning and saw it. And I have lived with that. And I have not slept right in 11 months. And I am done, Garrett. I am here tonight because Judge Crane is on Hattie's kitchen table with a bullet in his shoulder that Sutton's foreman put there at sundown, and he is asking for you, and he is asking for the woman who stood on your porch this morning. I owe you a bullet from Shiloh Garrett. I have come to pay it. Garrett Ashford did not lower the rifle, but he did not raise it. Get off your horse, Burnett. The sheriff got off his horse. He walked to the porch in the dark. Garrett met him at the top step. 2 men who had not embraced in 16 years embraced once briefly, and Caleb Ashford, 8 years old, watching from the small high window of his loft above the kitchen, saw the whole of it framed in the lantern light, and would remember it the rest of his life. Sheriff Burnett Bellwether came into the kitchen. He took off his hat. He saw Clara at the table. He saw Ruby with the rifle. He saw the ledger and the copied letters and the original will, and his face went still. My God. Yes, said Clara. That is her hand. Yes. And the ledger. $18,412, Sheriff, over 7 years. Confirmed by Mr. Pike in Jefferson City. Pike is dead. He is. The letters say Sutton killed him. They do not say by whose hand, but the will and the ledger will do. Do what? Will do to put a sitting banker in irons in front of his own bank in the morning. The sheriff looked at her under his gray mustache, and something almost like a smile moved across his face. Hattie told me you were a good woman. Mrs. Bellwether was kinder to me yesterday, sir, than any soul in St. Louis has been in 6 weeks. And she has been waiting 11 months to tell you a story, Miss Whitfield, from your mother. Clara went very still. Sheriff. Yes, miss. My mother died 9 years ago. She had no sister. She had a half-sister, miss, by her father's first marriage. A girl named Hattie who was raised in Willow Creek. Every letter that woman wrote your mother for 24 years went through the post office in Willow Creek. The postmaster of that post office, miss, is Harlan Sutton's nephew. Clara sat down because her knees would not hold her up. And the woman on the boardwalk knew you the moment you stepped down off the wagon, miss. She has had a tintype of your mother on her mantle since she was 16 years old. She had been waiting 24 years to put her hands on you. Clara pressed both her hands against her face. She did not cry. Garrett Ashford put his hand on her shoulder. The sheriff turned his back and looked at the kitchen wall. Ruby set the rifle down on the table and walked to her father and put her face against his arm. Clara breathed once. She breathed again. She stood up. Sheriff Bellwether, how long do we have? He is coming with 4 men, miss. He will be here in 40 minutes. Then there is no time. Mr. Ashford, you and Ruby leave now. Not at sunrise. Now. He will kill you. He will not, Mr. Ashford. His foreman has shot a sitting circuit judge today. That is a federal hanging offense. He has overplayed his hand, and he does not yet know it. He has one thing left in his hand, and that is panic. I know how to receive a panicked man in a kitchen. I held my father's hand for 7 years. He looked at her. You are not the help. I am the help, Mr. Ashford. I am the help your wife sent for. I did not know it until tonight. He closed his eyes. He turned to Ruby. Saddle the bay. Saddle the chestnut. Now. She was gone out the door before he finished the sentence. He went to his desk. He came back. He pressed the small brass key into Clara's palm. In case I do not make it back, miss. You will make it back. He went to the cellar door. He carried June out of her bed wrapped in the quilt and laid her in the small space under the back stairs and kissed her forehead. Caleb came down on his own in his nightshirt with his bare feet steady on the cold wood. He stood in front of his father at the foot of the cellar steps. Garrett Ashford knelt down. He put his hands on the boy's shoulders. I cannot protect your sister tonight. I have to ride with Ruby. You are 8 years old, and you are the man in this house from the moment I go out that door. Yes, Pa. Miss Whitfield will stand in the kitchen. Sheriff Bellwether will stand on the porch. But your sister Caleb, your sister is yours, not theirs. Yours. Yes, Pa. Garrett Ashford reached into his vest pocket. He took out a folding knife, bone handle, brass bolster, smooth from his thumb. He laid it in his son's palm. This was your grandfather's. He gave it to me the morning I rode out for Shiloh. He said it would bring me back. It brought me back, son. I am giving it to you tonight. When you are afraid down in that cellar, you put your hand around it, and you remember that I am coming back. Yes, Pa. Say it again. You are coming back, Pa. That is right, son. He stood. He kissed the top of his son's head once. He climbed the cellar steps. He came up. He shut the door. He turned the iron latch. Clara slid the heavy wooden chest in front of it. Miss Whitfield. Yes, sir. Eleanor wrote me a letter. It was in the safe at Stone Hollow with the deeds. I will read it when I get there. How do you know there is a letter? Because she wrote me one every year of our marriage on the morning of our anniversary. And the anniversary was the 3rd week of November. And she wrote one before she died. And she put it where she put the will. And I have not been ready, miss, until tonight. He looked at her one long moment. Eleanor sent the wrong letter to the agency, and in the wrong letter she sent me you. He turned and went out the door. Clara stood in the empty kitchen with the brass key in her hand, and her own father's letter folded against her chest. And she heard the bay horse and the chestnut go out of the yard at a gallop down the east fence line. And she heard them clear the creek crossing in the dark. And she heard them go. She turned to Sheriff Bellwether. Coffee. Coming. She put the kettle on. She set out 3 cups. She turned 2 of them upside down. She left one face up. She sat down at the kitchen table across from the sheriff and folded her hands in her lap, and the lantern threw her shadow long across the kitchen floor and out into the yard. Up on the road from town, 5 horses came around the bend at a slow trot. The lilac in the back garden did not move. It only waited. Inside the kitchen, Clara Whitfield poured the coffee. The sheriff lifted his cup. The horses came on. They came into the yard at a slow walk. 5 horses. 4 men in the saddle. 1 man with a silver chain across his vest. 1 small, sweating lawyer with a satchel of papers. 2 strangers in town clothes with rifles across their saddles. And 1 man in a tin star pinned crooked on his coat, riding at the back, holding the reins with 1 hand and his hat with the other. Clara had counted them through the curtain. Sheriff Bellwether had named them low across the kitchen table. That is Silas Cobb, my deputy. 9 years I have ridden with that man. His sister is married to Sutton's eldest boy. He is the one we do not know. The 2 strangers are bought guns out of Springfield. The lawyer is Mortimer Finch. He will weep before he draws. And Sutton. Sutton will not draw. He has never drawn. He pays men to draw. Sheriff. Yes, miss. Tonight is the first night I have ever pointed a rifle at a man. I know it, miss. I am 24 years old. I know it. Will my hand shake? Burnett Bellwether looked at her across the table. He was 54 years old, and he had carried a man out of a wheat field at Shiloh. And he had buried 2 of his own children in the churchyard behind the blue door. And he looked at Clara Whitfield over his coffee, and his face did the thing under the gray mustache that was almost a smile. No, miss, your hand will not shake. I have seen the way you set down a coffee cup. You will be still. The horses stopped at the foot of the porch steps. The sheriff stood. He set down his cup and picked up his own rifle and walked to the front door. He turned at the threshold. Miss. Yes, Sheriff. You will be at that window with the Henry rifle. Curtain drawn back 1 inch. You will not show yourself unless I say your name. You will not fire unless his hand goes inside his coat. You hear me? I hear you. And miss. Yes. If you do fire once, the second shot is the one you live with. He went out onto the porch. Clara walked to the window. She set the Henry rifle on the sill. She drew the curtain back 1 inch. She put her thumb on the hammer and her finger lightly across the trigger guard. And she breathed in once all the way down to her stomach, the way her father had taught her to breathe before reciting in church. Out in the yard, Harlan Sutton swung down off his chestnut horse. He did not see her. The kitchen was darker than the yard. The lantern on the table had been turned low. He saw only Burnett Bellwether, standing on the porch in his shirt sleeves with a rifle across his arm. Sheriff. Sutton. You are off your patrol. I am at the home of a man whose children have been the subject of repeated petitions in this district. I have been instructed by Judge Crane to remain on this premises until a federal marshal arrives in the morning. Judge Crane. Judge Crane, sir. Judge Crane suffered an unfortunate incident on the creek road this evening. He is not in a position to instruct anyone. Mr. Sutton, sir, I have just left Judge Crane at my own kitchen table. He is in fair spirits. He sends his regards. And he sends a warrant signed at sundown for the arrest of one Cyrus Doyle Foreman of the Sutton Ranch on a charge of attempted murder of a sitting circuit judge of the state of Missouri. There was a long silence on the porch. Lawyer Mortimer Finch made a small choked sound in his throat. The 2 strangers in town clothes had not moved, but their hands had shifted half an inch toward the rifles laid across their saddles. Sheriff. Mr. Sutton. Step away from the door. I will not, Mr. Sutton. Sheriff, you have a paper on you signed by me, witnessed by Judge Pickett, ordering the arrest of one Clara Whitfield of St. Louis on a charge of theft from the first bank of Willow Creek. I have it, Mr. Sutton. It is in my pocket. Then serve it. I cannot, Mr. Sutton. Why not? Because, sir, the warrant is signed by you, and the bank in question is your own bank, and the witness is a man whose appointment to the bench was paid for, sir. by a draft drawn on your bank in the amount of $900 in May of last year. And no warrant of that pedigree, sir, will hold up in front of a federal marshal in the morning, and I will not serve a paper tonight that I will be answering for in a federal court tomorrow. Sutton's jaw moved once, just once. Sheriff Bellwether. Yes, Mr. Sutton. You have served this county for 19 years. I have, sir. You have a daughter in St. Louis. I do, sir. At a school, I believe. At a school Mr. Sutton paid for by my wife's people. Not by your bank. Not by you. Clara at the window saw the muscle in Sutton's jaw move a second time. Sheriff. Yes, Mr. Sutton. Mr. Cobb. The deputy at the back of the riders turned his horse 1/4 turn. He did not dismount. He did not speak. Mr. Cobb, please dismount. Mr. Sutton. The deputy's voice was thin. Thin in the way a thread is thin just before it breaks. Sir. Please dismount, Mr. Cobb. Mr. Sutton. Sir. Mr. Cobb. The deputy did not dismount. Mr. Cobb. Sir, with respect, the sheriff is right. The whole porch went still. Mr. Cobb. Sir, my sister is married to your boy. I know it. And I am not a man who has been kind to this family, and I am ashamed of it. But, sir, there is a circuit judge in this town with a bullet in him tonight. And I will not put my name on the next thing you ask me to do. The rest of what I saw Mr. Sutton on the morning of the snow 11 months ago. The two strangers in town clothes had gone very still. Lawyer Mortimer Finch was no longer breathing in a way that could be called breathing. Cobb. Sir. Get off that horse. Sir, no. Cobb. No, sir. I will ride back to town. I will tell my sister what I have seen here tonight. And if you ask me one more thing, sir, I will tell her the rest. The rest of what, Cobb? The rest of what I saw Mr. Sutton on the morning of the snow. There was a silence on the porch that had a weight to it, like the silence in a church between the prayer and the amen. Clara at the window watched Harlan Sutton's hand drift toward the inside of his coat. Slow. The way a man reaches for a thing he has had ready a long time. Mr. Sutton, sir. Sheriff Bellwether did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Take your hand off that pistol. Take your hand off, sir. There is a Henry rifle on you from the kitchen window in the hands of a young woman who has been the lawful occupant of this house since yesterday morning. And she does not miss. Sutton did not turn his head. There is no woman with a rifle in that window, Sheriff. Look then, Mr. Sutton. He looked. Clara stood at the kitchen window with the rifle leveled at his chest. Through the open shutter, and her hands did not shake, and her face did not move, and the lantern behind her on the table threw her shadow long across the kitchen floor. Sutton took his hand out of his coat slowly. He looked at her for a long moment. He looked at her the way a man looks at a thing he has miscounted. And then his eyes traveled up slow to the brooch in her hair, the silver of the magnolia in the lantern light. His face did not change, not entirely, but something behind it did. Something that had been certain for 44 years suddenly was not certain anymore. Miss Whitfield, Mr. Sutton, that brooch, my mother's, sir, your mother. Elizabeth Whitfield, born Eliza Sutton of Independence, Missouri. The silver chain across his vest trembled. Hattie. What? Hattie's sister. Half-sister, sir. Yours and Hattie's father had 2 wives. My mother was the elder. She went east at 18. She married a Lutheran minister in St. Louis. She died 9 years ago this month. And she had a daughter, sir, whose name is Clara Whitfield. And that daughter has been standing on your dead sister's porch for 2 days. And you have not looked at her once. Not once, sir. You have looked at the contract. You have looked at the agency. You have looked at the $8 a month. And you have looked past the brooch in my hair 4 times. And you have not seen what every woman in your town saw the moment I stepped down off the wagon. She had not meant to say it. It came out of her mouth like a thing that had been waiting in her chest since yesterday afternoon when Hattie Bellwether had wept on a boardwalk. And it came out level. And it came out final. And it was the second to last sentence Harlan Sutton would hear as a free man in the state of Missouri. The last sentence was Sheriff Bellwether's. Mr. Sutton, sir, get off the porch, on your knees, hands behind your head. You are under arrest for the murder of your sister, Eleanor Sutton Ashford, for the murder of attorney Jameson Pike of Jefferson City, for the embezzlement of the estate of the Reverend Obadiah Sutton over a period of 7 years, for the attempted murder of Judge Crane this evening, and for any further charge that I or this federal marshal sees fit to add between now and sunup. Mr. Cobb, the irons. Cobb dismounted. Sutton did not move. He stood at the foot of the porch steps with one hand half raised toward his vest, and his eyes locked on the brooch in the kitchen window. And Clara Whitfield watched a man understand in slow motion that he had built a kingdom on a foundation he had failed to see for 2 days, and that the foundation had walked in off a wagon, and that the foundation was in some terrible and exact and irreversible way family. Miss Whitfield, Mr. Sutton, you came up that road yesterday morning. I did, sir. With $20 in the hem of your dress. Yes, sir. You were nothing, miss. Yes, sir, I was. What changed? She lowered the rifle 1 inch. What changed, Mr. Sutton, is that a 5-year-old child climbed into my lap last night and told me her mother smelled like soap. And what changed, sir, is that an 11-year-old child took me to the loft of a barn after supper and gave me a tin box. And what changed, Mr. Sutton, is that a woman you never knew was my aunt put a piece of hard candy in my hand on a boardwalk and told me I was nobody's property. And what changed, sir, is that a man whose name you have been dragging through the mud of this town for 11 months walked from his supper plate at midnight to a bedroom door because a child was crying. And I saw his candle, Mr. Sutton. I saw it. And I made up my mind. She set the rifle on the windowsill. Get down on your knees, sir. He got down on his knees. Cobb put the irons on him by the lantern light on the porch boards. Lawyer Finch slid sideways off his horse and was sick into the grass. The two strangers in town clothes turned their horses without a word and rode out of the yard at a gallop, and they did not come back, and they were never heard of again in Cottonwood County. Sheriff Bellwether walked down the porch steps and took the chestnut horse by the bridle and tied it to the rail. Clara stood at the window with both hands flat on the sill, and her face wet with tears she had not known were falling. 40 years later, on the porch in 1918, Caleb Ashford would say to his nephew Tobias, "I was in the cellar. I did not see it. Years later, your grandmother told me. She said, 'Caleb, a bullet does not have to fire to kill a man. Sometimes you just have to let him know the bullet exists.' That was the fourth thing the summer taught me. I have not had to fire a gun at a man since Cuba. But I have known every day since I was 8 years old that I could." Inside the kitchen on the night of August the 9th, 1878, Clara Whitfield turned from the window and walked to the cellar door and slid the chest aside and opened the latch. "Caleb, June, babies, you can come up now." Caleb came up first with June in his arms, the quilt over both their heads. Clara knelt on the kitchen floor. She lifted the quilt off the children's faces. "It is over, sweetheart." June stared at her. "The man with the silver chain, is he gone?" "He is gone, baby. He is not coming back." "Where is Pa?" "Pa is on the road, sweetheart. Pa is bringing the truth back to your mama." June was quiet a long moment. Miss Sarah. She used a name Clara had never heard her use, the name Caleb had whispered to her in the dark of the cellar. The name June would later switch to Miss Clara, and then to Mama, and would call her in time by all three names without ever once saying any of them wrong. Mama saw. Yes, baby. Mama saw the man on the ridge. Clara pulled the child against her chest and held on. Yes, sweetheart. Mama saw. And Mama did everything she could. Mama wrote it down. Mama left it for us to find. Mama did not leave you. Do you hear me, June? Mama did not leave you. Mama did not leave me. No, baby. She did not. The child put her face against Clara's neck. And for the second time in 11 months, June Ashford wept like a child who had been allowed at last to set down a thing she should never have been asked to carry. Caleb stood beside them. His hand was in his pocket. His fingers were closed around the folding knife. He did not cry. He had been told he was the man of the house, and he understood in the way an 8-year-old understands that the man of the house does not cry in front of his sister. He would wait. He would go out to the barn later. He would cry there. He did cry there. Garrett Ashford found him there at sunrise and knelt down beside him on the straw, and did not speak and did not stop him, and held him until he was done. And Caleb Ashford on a porch in 1918 would say to his nephew, "That was the third thing the summer taught me. A man is a promise he keeps to someone weaker than him. My father had ridden 12 miles to keep a promise. I had stayed in a cellar to keep one. By sunrise, we had both kept them, and we sat in the barn afterward, and we did not have to say it to each other. Some promises are only kept once. But that was the next morning. Tonight, Sheriff Burnett Bellwether and Deputy Silas Cobb rode east in the dark, with a banker in irons between them, and Lawyer Mortimer Finch on a lead horse weeping into his hands, and the lantern of the kitchen window burning yellow behind them, like a thing that had been lit and would not be put out. Clara Whitfield did not sleep. She had not slept in 2 nights. She sat on the kitchen floor with June in her lap until the child's breathing slowed into sleep, and then she sat with the child a while longer. Caleb had fallen asleep against her shoulder with his hand fisted in the gray cloth of her dress. The rifle was still on the windowsill. The lantern was still burning, and outside in the yard, dawn was coming up over the cottonwoods, slow and pink and indifferent to everything that had happened on the porch boards in the dark. A horse came up the road just past sunrise. Clara did not move. She had thought she would never move again. "Miss Sarah." The voice was a woman's from the porch, not a man's. It used the name Hattie had whispered into her hair on the boardwalk 2 days ago. The name Hattie had wept onto Clara's mother's collar in 19 letters between 1854 and 1858. The name Clara herself had never been called by anyone in her life. "Miss Sarah Child, it's me." Clara lifted June off her lap, careful as a woman handles a thing that might break, and laid the child on the kitchen bench. She walked to the front door and opened it. Hattie Bellwether stood on the porch in a sun-faded blue dress, with a basket on her arm, and tears running down her face. "Aunt Hattie." "Sarah." The 2 women looked at each other. Then Hattie Bellwether dropped the basket on the porch boards and came across the threshold and pulled Clara Whitfield against her chest. And she held her like a woman holds a child she has been waiting 24 years to hold. She said her sister Eliza's name into Clara's hair, over and over, until both of them were weeping, and neither of them was trying to stop. "Aunt Hattie, my sister's girl, my Eliza's girl. You wrote letters. I wrote 100. Every one of them came back to me open child or did not come back at all. Papa thought your mama had no people. Your mama thought I had not wanted her. Harlan's people had her believing it from the day she went east. He told her I had said things. He told me she had said things. He kept us apart, child, the way a man keeps 2 horses from drinking just to prove he can. And I have been 24 years, Sarah, looking for the chance to put it right. Aunt Hattie, what baby? My father's letter to me. He wrote it the night before he died. He said, 'Be useful, child, and the Lord will set a place for you.' Yes, baby. He set a place for me. He did, baby, he did." The 2 women stood in the doorway of the kitchen and held on, and June woke up on the bench and watched them with eyes that had gone for the first time in 11 months, soft. The federal marshal arrived from Jefferson City at 3 in the afternoon. He was a tall, thin man with a beard and a quiet voice, and his name was Jonas Bridger. He had with him 3 deputies in a wagon. and he came up onto the porch and tipped his hat to Clara and asked for the will. She gave it to him. He read it. He read the ledger. He read each of the 8 letters in the order they had been written. When he finished, he put the papers back on the kitchen table and folded his hands together and looked at her. "Miss Whitfield." "Sir." "You found this last night?" "Yes, sir." "In a barn loft?" "Yes, sir." "And by sunrise this morning, miss, the man named in those letters was in irons in my office in Jefferson City?" "Yes, sir." "And the foreman of his ranch, miss, the man who pulled the trigger 11 months ago?" She went still. "Sir." "He was picked up at 4 o'clock this morning, miss, on the western road riding hard for the Kansas line. He had $1,000 in gold in his saddlebag and a letter of credit in his vest, and he confessed inside of 2 hours. His name is Cyrus Doyle. He named Mr. Sutton as the man who paid him $500 for your sister-in-law's death and $300 for the death of the attorney in Jefferson City. The hotel keeper in Jefferson City has been a quiet man for 11 months. He is not a quiet man anymore." Clara pressed her hand against her mouth. "And Mr. Ashford?" "Riding back from Stone Hollow as we speak, miss. The papers from the safe are with my deputy on the eastbound stage. They will be in my office before nightfall." "What was in the safe, sir?" The marshal almost smiled. $42,000 in greenbacks, miss. The original deed to this ranch in your mother-in-law's name. The original deed to the First Bank of Willow Creek in your mother-in-law's name. And the Reverend Obadiah Sutton's last will and testament, which leaves his entire estate, miss, to Mrs. Eleanor Sutton Ashford, and to her issue with explicit instruction that his son receive nothing because his son had, in the Reverend's own words, put his hand into the offering plate of the Lord since the age of 14, and had not in 50 years taken it out. Clara put her face in her hands. "Sir." "Yes, miss. That is more money than I can think about." "It is, miss. It is more money than most men in this state will see in a lifetime. And it belongs by the will of the Reverend Obadiah Sutton and by the will of his daughter to Mr. Garrett Ashford and his 3 children without conditions, without challenge, without any further argument from any court in the state of Missouri." He paused. "And there is one more thing." He took out a folded paper from inside his coat. It was sealed with red wax. The wax had the imprint of a small magnolia pressed into it. "This was inside the will, miss, folded in a smaller envelope sealed in your sister-in-law's hand, addressed in her handwriting to the woman who comes." He held it out. Clara took it. She broke the wax. She unfolded the paper. She read it once. She read it twice. She put her hand flat against the kitchen table. "Read it aloud, miss, if you would." She read it aloud. Her voice did not shake. "To the woman who comes. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and my brother has not yet won. I do not know your name. I do not know your age. I do not know what you have suffered to be a woman with no people who agreed to come to a stranger's house in a country you do not know. But I know one thing about you. I know you are brave. The lilac in the back garden was planted by my youngest daughter, June, on the morning after my body was put in the ground. She does not know her hands planted it. She was 4 years old, and she was not in her right mind, and I do not blame her. But that lilac woman is the truest thing I have left in this world. If my brother is in irons by the time you read this letter, then you have done what I could not. And the second thing I leave you after my children is 120 acres in the southeast quarter of this place, fenced and watered with a creek, and a stand of pecan, and a small house at the end of the lane that was meant for my mother before she died. The deed is in the safe in Stone Hollow in your name to be filled in by my husband when he learns it. The land is yours. The lilac is yours. The children, woman, are not mine to give, but I will tell you this: love them and they will love you back. They are men and they are good. And to my husband, Garrett Ashford. If you are reading this with her, I tell you this: I went out into the cottonwoods that morning to face my brother alone because I knew he would not come into our house with our children watching. I knew he would meet me on the ridge. I knew what he would do. I left because I could not let him do it in your kitchen. I am sorry. I am so sorry, my love. Marry her. Marry the woman who came. Do not be alone again. Eleanor. The kitchen was very quiet. The marshal cleared his throat once and stood up. Miss Whitfield. Sir, I will leave you now. I will be at Mrs. Bellwether's, miss, until tomorrow. There will be papers to sign in the morning. I would like to take some coffee if it is offered, and I would like to leave you to your own. Yes, sir. And miss. Yes, sir. In 19 years of riding circuit, miss, I have never read a letter like that one. He walked out. Garrett Ashford came home at dusk. He came up the road on the bay horse with Ruby in front of him in the saddle and the leather satchel across his chest, and he saw the marshal's wagon gone, and he saw the lantern in the kitchen window, and he saw Clara Whitfield standing on the porch in her gray dress, with her hair coming loose from its braid. He stopped the bay at the foot of the porch steps and did not get down. Miss, Mr. Ashford, it is done. It is done. He is in irons. He is. And the foreman, too. The man closed his eyes. Miss. Yes, sir. My wife. Yes, sir. My wife did not. No, sir. She did not. The man's shoulders dropped, and Ruby in the saddle in front of him turned and put her small hand against her father's face. Pa? Yes, baby. Mama did not leave us. No, baby, she did not. Mama was protecting us. Yes, baby, she was. Pa? What, baby? Get down off the horse. He got down off the horse. He lifted Ruby down. The girl ran to Clara and put her face against her gray dress and held on. And Caleb came running from the barn with his hand still in his pocket on the folding knife. And Garrett knelt in the dust of the yard and picked up his son. And June came out of the kitchen on her bare feet and stood at the top of the porch steps, watching them. And then She ran down the steps and across the yard, and Garrett Ashford had 3 of his children in his arms at once, and he did not cry, but the lines in his face that had been put there by 11 months of believing the wrong thing about the woman he had buried under a lilac in his back garden. Those lines smoothed slow as a man might smooth a blanket over a sleeping child. Clara stood on the porch and watched. She did not go to him. She gave him the children first. When the man was ready, he stood. He set the children down. He walked up the porch steps slow. "Miss Whitfield?" "Yes, sir." "There was a letter." "Yes, sir." "With my name on it." "Yes, sir." "In her handwriting." "Yes, sir." She held out the folded letter from her chest. He took it. He read it standing up on the porch in the evening light. He read it again. He sat down on the top step of the porch with his back against the post and his hand over his mouth, and he read it a 3rd time, and he set it down on the porch boards and turned his face up to the evening sky, and he did not weep, but his shoulders moved once, and Clara understood that she was watching a man set down something he had been carrying alone since a morning in the snow 11 months ago. She did not speak. She knelt down beside him on the porch step, and she put her hand flat on the porch boards beside his hand, and she did not look at him. After a long time he spoke. "Miss Whitfield?" "Yes, Mr. Ashford." "Walk with me to the lilac." He walked with her to the lilac. They stood at the foot of the small mound at the back of the garden, where the lilac was just beginning to bloom in the late summer heat, a thing that should not bloom in August in southern Missouri, but did, because it had been planted by a 4-year-old child who did not know any better than to plant a flower out of season, and the plant had decided to bloom anyway. "Eleanor." The man said her name out loud for the first time in 11 months. "Eleanor, the man who killed you is in irons. Cyrus Doyle is in irons. Your father's money is coming home. Your children are safe. And I have a letter from you, my love, telling me to marry the woman who came." He turned to Clara. "Miss." "Yes, sir." "Not tonight." "No, sir." "Not next month." "No, sir." "But, miss." "Yes, sir." "In time." "In time, Mr. Ashford." She put her hand in his. He held it. They stood at the lilac until the sun went down behind the cottonwoods, and then they walked back to the house together, and they did not speak. The summer turned slow. June began to speak again at the supper table. She did not speak to her father at first, but she spoke to her brother and to her sister, and to Aunt Hattie and to Clara. And one Tuesday evening at the end of August, she climbed into her father's lap and asked him to read her a story. He read her a story. She fell asleep on his chest, with her thumb in her mouth, and he did not move from the chair for 2 hours. And when he finally did move, it was to carry her to bed himself. And he tucked the quilt up under her chin, and he sat on the edge of the small bed, and he watched her breathe in the dark for a long time, and he had not done that since the winter before the snow. Caleb grew an inch and put a calf in the front pasture of his own and named it Mr. Miller, after the old man who had taught him to ride. He kept the folding knife in his pocket every day. He did not draw it. He did not need to. He only put his hand on it sometimes when he stood on the porch at evening the way a soldier touches a medal. Ruby turned 12 in September. Clara sewed her a dress out of the bolt of blue calico that Aunt Hattie had been keeping in a trunk for 24 years, a bolt of cloth that Eliza Sutton had sent her sister from St. Louis in 1854, with a note that said, "I will see you next Christmas." And the note had been the last letter Hattie had ever received from her sister that had not been opened by another hand. Ruby wore the dress to church on the Sunday after her birthday, and the women of Willow Creek who had stood on the boardwalk and stared at Clara on the morning she stepped off the wagon, those women came down off their porches and shook Clara Whitfield's hand on the church steps and called her by her name. Harlan Sutton was hanged in Jefferson City on the 4th of October, 1878. Cyrus Doyle was hanged a week later. Mortimer Finch turned state's evidence and was sent to a prison in St. Louis for 15 years. He sent a letter from the prison in November addressed to Clara Whitfield. He asked for her forgiveness. She did not write back. She was not yet ready, and she did not pretend to be. She put the letter in the kitchen stove and watched it burn. Judge Walter Crane recovered. The bullet had missed his heart by an inch and a half. He came up the road one morning in late September on his gray horse, with a cane across his saddle and a wedding Bible in a tin box. He ate at the Ashford table. He told stories to the children. He did not leave until after midnight. And when he left the Bible on the kitchen table and he said, "When you are ready, Mr. Ashford." Garrett Ashford did not touch the Bible until the first frost. The first frost came in the 3rd week of November. He took the Bible down off the kitchen shelf that morning and set it on the table and looked at Clara Whitfield over the top of his coffee cup. "Miss Whitfield." "Yes, Mr. Ashford." "I have asked the children." "Yes, sir." Ruby said yes. "Yes, sir." Caleb said yes. "Yes, sir." June said. The man's mouth twitched. June said she would only say yes, miss, if I called you Clara and not Miss Whitfield in our own kitchen. "Did she, sir?" "She did." "Clara? Then I expect you had better." He stood up. He came around the table. He knelt on the kitchen floor in front of her chair, like a man much older than his years, and like a man much younger. And he took her hand in both of his, and he did not look away. Clara Whitfield. "Garrett, I am asking." "Yes." "You have not heard the asking." "I have, Garrett. I have heard it for 3 months. Ask it." "Marry me." "Yes." "Clara." "Yes, Garrett, yes. The answer was yes the night you walked from your supper plate at midnight to a bedroom door because a child was crying. The answer has been yes since I saw your candle." "Yes." He pressed his face against her hand. They were married on the second Sunday in December 1878, at the small church in Willow Creek by a circuit preacher who had not known Sutton and who did not need to. Aunt Hattie stood up with Clara. Sheriff Burnett Bellwether stood up with Garrett. The two old soldiers from Shiloh stood beside each other in church, as they had not stood beside each other in 16 years. And Burnett's hand shook once when he handed the ring to Garrett, and Garrett's did not. And the ring was the wedding ring of the Reverend Eli Whitfield, sent by Hattie from a small velvet bag she had kept in her trunk for 24 years. Ruby held June's hand. Caleb held the ring. In Caleb's other pocket hidden was the folding knife. Clara wore the blue dress Aunt Hattie had been keeping in a trunk for 24 years. She carried a sprig of dried lilac from the back garden. She did not cry until the preacher said the words, "Till death do you part." And then she cried, and so did Garrett Ashford, because both of them had stood once over a grave under a lilac, and both of them knew now that death had not parted Eleanor Sutton Ashford from her family at all. Death had only cleared the way for her last gift. The 120 acres in the southeast quarter were never sold. Clara kept the deed in her name as Eleanor had wished, and she put a tenant family on the small house at the end of the lane, a young couple from Stone Hollow with 2 children, and no people of their own, sent up the road by the Beecham Agency on Olive Street in St. Louis, at Clara's own request. She paid them a fair wage. She read to their children on Sunday afternoons. She did, Aunt Hattie said, what her sister Eleanor would have done if she had lived to do it. Hattie and Burnett Bellwether had no children of their own. They became the second grandparents of the Ashford children. Hattie taught June to bake bread. Burnett taught Caleb to shoot. And on the porch of the Ashford place on summer evenings, the 2 old soldiers from Shiloh sat in the rockers Garrett had carved, and they did not talk much the way old men do, who have nothing left to prove to each other. Hattie died in 1903. Burnett died a year later. Clara said on the porch the morning of Burnett's funeral that Burnett had not known how to live without Hattie, and so he had not lived. And she said it without sadness, the way a woman states a true fact about weather. Garrett Ashford lived to be 71 years old. He was buried in 1912 beside Eleanor, under the lilac in the back garden, by his own request, with a stone that read, "Husband to 2 good women, father to 4 good children, a man who did not deserve either, but learned." The 4th child was a girl. She was born in 1880 on the 12th of June, in the small room off the kitchen where Clara had slept the first night. They named her Eleanor. She grew up dark-haired and serious, and she was the only one of the 4 Ashford children who had her mother's voice rather than her father's. And Clara would say years later, "I named her for the woman who sent me. I named her for the truest thing I have ever done." Ruby married a doctor named Whitlock. They stayed in the valley. She had 4 children. The eldest was a boy named Tobias, born in 1908. Caleb went to Cuba in 1898 with the Rough Riders. He carried the folding knife. He came home with a Spanish bullet in his shoulder, and a wife from St. Louis named Margaret Ellis, and he took over the ranch from his father. They had 3 children. The middle one was a boy named Garrett after his grandfather. Garrett enlisted in the spring of 1918 and shipped for France in May. June grew up tall and quiet and clear-eyed, and at the age of 15 she was the best shot in the valley with a Henry rifle, and at the age of 19 she went east to St. Louis to read law at Washington University. And at the age of 24 she came home to Willow Creek and hung out a shingle next to the bank her uncle had once owned, and the shingle read, "June Ashford, Attorney at Law." The first case she took was a free defense of a woman whose husband had been beating her. She won. It was one of the first rulings on a woman's right to bodily safety from her husband in the state of Missouri. The valley remembered her. The valley remembers her still. Caleb Ashford finished the story. The sun had moved across the porch and was now low in the west, lying gold on the lilac, turning the pale clusters a deeper purple that was almost the color of grapeskins. Tobias had not moved from his place at his uncle's feet. The folding knife still sat in Caleb's open palm. The kitchen window framed the white head of a 64-year-old woman bent over her knitting. "Uncle Caleb." "Yes, son." "Where is Grandma Clara now?" Caleb looked toward the kitchen window. He looked at the woman in the chair, at the soft click of the knitting needles, at the half-finished sock in her lap. "She is in the kitchen, son. She is knitting a sock for your cousin Garrett. But Garrett is not coming back." "No, son, he is not. You have to tell her." "I know it." "When?" "When the sun goes down behind the cottonwoods. I will give her the day, Tobias. The day is hers. The grief is mine until sundown. Then it will be hers." Tobias was quiet a long time. "Uncle Caleb." "Yes." "Did Grandma Clara ever regret coming here?" Caleb did not answer right away. He looked at the lilac. He looked at the cottonwoods. He looked at the long, dry road that came up from town, where 40 years ago a wagon had thrown off a young woman in a gray dress. Once, I was 60 years old. I asked her that question. She laughed. She said, "Caleb, my life has 2 moments. The first moment was when that wagon driver flung my bag in the dust at Willow Creek, and the whole town decided I was nothing. The second moment was when I walked up the porch steps of this house for the first time, and an 8-year-old boy looked at me like I was a stranger. Between those 2 moments, I walked 5 miles. No, Caleb, I have never regretted walking 5 miles." Tobias nodded slowly. "Uncle Caleb." "Yes, son." "Did great-granddad Garrett love Grandma Clara?" Caleb looked down at the folding knife in his palm. "He loved 2 women in his life, son. Wholly. He loved Eleanor first, and he buried her under that lilac. He loved Clara second, and she gave him a daughter named Eleanor and 40 years of mournings. It was not a replacement, Tobias. It was a continuation. There is a difference. Some men do not learn the difference. My father did. That is what made him my father." Caleb stood up. He went over to the lilac and put his hand on a low branch and bent it toward his face. and breathed in the smell of it. "Tobias." "Yes, sir." "Come here, son." The boy came. Caleb knelt down so that his face was level with his nephew's, the way Garrett Ashford had knelt down on a cellar floor in front of an 8-year-old boy on a hot night 40 years ago. He held out the folding knife. "This is yours now, Tobias." The boy stared at it. "Uncle Caleb, it went to Cuba with me. It went to France with your cousin Garrett. It came back. Sometimes the knife is the only thing that comes back, son. That does not make it less. Your great-granddad gave it to me on the night your Grandma Clara stood in the kitchen window with a rifle in her hands. He told me he was coming back. He came back. Garrett did not. But the knife came back. And it is yours now until you have a son or a nephew or a boy you owe a promise to. Then you will give it to him." The boy closed his hand around the knife. He did not cry. He understood the way children understand that he had been given a weight that men 3 times his age carried, and that he was being trusted to carry it. "Yes, sir." "Good son." Caleb stood up. He looked at the kitchen window. The light was beginning to drop. The clicking of the knitting needles had slowed. His mother had lowered her work into her lap. She was looking out the window. She had heard perhaps something in the silence on the porch. A grandmother knows. "Tobias." "Yes, sir." "You stay out here a moment. I am going inside." "Yes, sir." Caleb climbed the porch steps. He paused at the threshold. He put his hand into his vest pocket and touched the folded telegram, and then he took his hand out of the pocket empty. He walked into the kitchen. Clara Whitfield, Ashford, 64 years old, white-haired, the magnolia brooch still pinned to her shawl. After 40 years lifted her face from her knitting. She had been Mrs. Ashford for 39 years, 11 months, and 3 weeks. She had buried a husband. She had buried 2 sisters of the soul. She had stood at the lilac 4 times in her life, and each time the lilac had bloomed out of season. She looked at her son. She knew. A mother always knows. She set the knitting down. She held out both her hands. "Caleb." "Mama." "Tell me, son." He sat down across from her in the chair her husband had occupied for 39 years, and he took her hands in both of his and he told her. And the lilac in the side yard bloomed out of season for the 2nd time since her wedding day. And that night the sun went down behind the cottonwoods slow and gold and indifferent to everything that had ever happened in the wide world. Clara Whitfield Ashford lived 20 more years after that summer afternoon in 1918. She died on the 7th of August, 1938, in the chair her husband had built. Her hand was in the hand of her youngest daughter, the 2nd Eleanor. Caleb sat beside the bed. Ruby was in the kitchen making coffee. June flew in by airplane from St. Louis the next morning, the first woman to land at the Willow Creek airfield. And she was 65 years old. And she still carried in her purse a small piece of waxed paper that had once held a piece of hard candy. The lilac in the back garden bloomed out of season the day Clara died. It was the third time in its life it had bloomed in August. It did not bloom out of season again. The valley remembered her. The valley remembers her still. And not one soul in Willow Creek from that summer in 1878 to this one has ever again called a stranger nothing.